Hey everyone, you're trying to buy a new car. You found the perfect model, the color, the features, everything is just right. But then, you ask the dealership, is this car registered in Canada? And they say, no, it's not. That's a bit of a bummer, isn't it? Because even though the car might be perfect, if it's not registered in Canada, you can't legally drive it on Canadian roads. Well, today, we're going to explore a similar question: is Newton registered in Canada? And before you start thinking about a time-traveling scientist, let's clarify that we're talking about Isaac Newton, the famous physicist and mathematician. Understanding the question: why would anyone even ask if Newton is registered in Canada? It's a strange question, right? But it actually brings up some interesting points about the way we think about historical figures and their place in the world. For one thing, it highlights the importance of legal and administrative records. In today's world, we're so used to having everything documented and registered. But what about historical figures who lived centuries ago? And then there's the question of nationality and citizenship. While we often associate Newton with England, where he was born and lived most of his life, was he ever considered a Canadian citizen? Or was the concept of citizenship even relevant in his time? Diving into the archives. To answer these questions, we need to dive into the archives and see what historical records we can find. Let's start with the Canadian archives. After doing some research, we find that there's no record of Isaac Newton ever being registered as a Canadian citizen. This makes sense, as the concept of Canadian citizenship didn't exist during Newton's lifetime. Canada wasn't even a country then, it was a British colony. But what about other records? Are there any documents that suggest Newton might have had some connection to Canada? We keep searching and eventually come across a fascinating piece of information. It seems that in the 17th century, there was a brief period when a group of English settlers tried to establish a colony in Newfoundland, which is now part of Canada. And guess who was involved in this venture? Isaac Newton. That's right, Newton was one of the investors in the Newfoundland colony. While this doesn't mean he ever lived in Canada or became a Canadian citizen, it does show that he had some interest in the region. The significance of Newton's connection to Canada. So, while Newton might not have been formally registered in Canada, his connection to the Newfoundland colony is still significant. It shows that even historical figures who are primarily associated with one country can have unexpected ties to others. It also highlights the importance of exploring the full context of historical events. By looking beyond the obvious, we can discover new and fascinating connections between people and places. Conclusion. To answer our original question, is Newton registered in Canada? The answer is no, at least not in the traditional sense of citizenship. But his involvement in the Newfoundland colony shows that he had some connection to the region. This story reminds us that history is full of unexpected twists and turns. Sometimes, the most interesting discoveries come from exploring the less obvious connections between people and places. With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time.